Hi, everyone. We got sound. Okay, great. So happy to be with you tonight. Okay, so first thing, I just have to say that was the best opening act I've ever had. So can we just get another round of applause for those beautiful dancers? My goodness. And then the second thing I have to say before I start is you guys brought the fashion tonight. Like the joyful clothing, I haven't seen a crowd this joyfully dressed in a really long time, so thank you for bringing me joy as we start this off. So I am so happy to be here with you. So we've been talking about joy, we're gonna keep talking about joy, but rather than just talk about it, I'd like to have a little experience of it. And this I think is gonna be easy after we've just started talking about what brings us joy. I'm gonna ask you to take a moment and close your eyes. And I want you to think back to a recent time in your life that felt joyful, a moment of joy. Could be a time when you felt completely free, or a time when you laughed so hard that it hurt. Maybe it was a time when the world felt magical to you. Or a time when you were surprised by the power of a simple pleasure. Maybe different moments come up, but when you land on one, see if you can put yourself back there in your mind. Remember who you were with, where you were, what was around you, what the light felt like, what the ground was like under your feet, if there are any sounds or scents that can help put you back in that place. Just notice those. And when you're really back there, I want you to turn your attention to your body. What does the feeling of joy feel like to you? Is it in one place or is it all over? Is it still or is it moving around? Does it have a color or a shape, a temperature or a texture? Just give this a few moments to notice what that feeling of joy is like in your body. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. How was that? Good? Feel good? Okay. I like to start with this. I see some smiles, so that's good. Had the desired effect. I like to start with this because I think a lot of us spend our lives up here, right? And we forget that actually our emotions are something we feel not just in our minds, but also in our bodies. I think that's really easy for difficult emotions. Like if I asked you what anxiety feels like in your body, pretty much everyone can tell me that off the bat. But what joy feels like in our bodies, it's easy to forget. And the reality is when we know what it feels like, when we remember what it feels like, what often happens is we notice that we're feeling it often, sometimes several times a day, and we're just not aware of it. As a culture, we are obsessed with the pursuit of happiness, and in the process, we often overlook joy. Now, we use those words interchangeably a lot of the time, and I want to take a moment to pull them apart. This actually came up in our initial discussion, this difference between happiness and joy. So let's just define those two things. So, happiness is a broad evaluation of how we feel about our lives over time. It has to do with whether we have a sense of meaning and purpose in life, how we feel about our health and our work, how connected we feel to other people. It consists of a broad range of factors. And so sometimes it can be hard to know in a given moment how happy we are. It's a bit big and vague and complex. But joy is much simpler and more immediate. So when psychologists use the word joy, what they mean is an intense, momentary experience of positive emotion. And this is something that we can measure through our direct physical expressions, things like smiling and laughter and feeling like we want to jump up and down. If happiness is how good we feel over time, joy is how good we feel right now, in the moment. And so if sometimes it's hard to know in a given moment, maybe your work is going great and something else in your life is not going so great, it's hard to know exactly how happy we are. When you're feeling a moment of joy, there's no doubt. Now, these moments of joy are small, and I think that's one of the reasons it's easy to overlook them. But small moments of joy can have surprisingly big effects, and I want to talk a little bit about the science of this, of what joy can actually do for us, even just these few moments a day. So the first is that joy attracts. Joy is an inherently attractive, magnetic emotion. All of our emotions are contagious. We spread them to each other through our tone of voice, our gestures, our facial expressions, even our walk can transmit emotions to other people. And so if on some unconscious level we know that we're going to catch the emotions of the people around us, it makes sense that we're going to be drawn to the people who are expressing joy. And this has an interesting side effect. It can actually make us more physically attractive. So scientists take these faces, they're computer generated, so no feelings hurt in this experiment, but they ask people to rate these different AI generated faces and tell them which ones are more attractive. And normally people will say that the faces on the right are the ones that are more attractive. But when they make the faces on the left, just smiling just a little bit of joy, not a ton of joy, but just like a little bit, people say the faces on the left are more attractive. So just adding a little bit of joy changes the way that people respond to us so much that they actually think that we're even better looking than we already are. Joy also improves our health across a wide range of measures. It increases our immunity. In one study, people who were exposed to the common cold when they were in a state of joy were less likely to catch it than people who were exposed when they were in a neutral or another emotional state. Joy can decrease inflammation in the body. And one of the most important things that joy can do is reset the cardiovascular effects of stress. So when we get stressed out, our blood pressure rises, our cortisol rises, our heart rate rises, and small moments of joy actually reset those systems and bring them back to a resting state faster than just relaxing or just vegging out in front of the TV, for example. So finding ways to experience these small moments of joy, if you have a very stressful occupation or stressful life, can help buffer those effects of stress on your heart over the long term. So it's not surprising that we find in longitudinal studies that experiencing more of these moments of joy can actually extend your lifespan. Joy also sharpens our minds, and I think this one might be surprising for those of us who have been raised to see joy as either a distraction from our hard work or a reward for our work. I feel like that is how joy is often framed in our culture, right? But studies show that, for example, doctors come to a correct diagnosis more quickly in a state of joy. So next time you're going to see your doctor, bring a joke. Joyful negotiators reach more win-win agreements. Joyful business leaders make better decisions. And some studies show that we're up to 12% more productive in a state of joy. That's an extra hour we could have back in our days just by bringing joy into our work as opposed to seeing it as the thing we get at the end of our work. Joy also opens us up to new ideas, and the reason for this is fascinating to me. So one of the theories behind the evolution of positive emotion is called broaden and build. And the idea behind the broaden and build theory is that negative emotions evolve to narrow our focus in to enable us to deal with immediate threats and challenges, whereas positive emotions broaden our focus out so that we can build resources for the future. We can do things like this, where we come and we learn and we meet new people and we grow. We can't do that when we are in a state of anxiety because we're closed off. We're trying to deal with the immediate challenge in front of us. And so it's not surprising that joy opens our perspective. We actually take in more information from our peripheral vision when we are in a state of joy. We see more, we notice more, we're more open to opportunities. Our cognitive flexibility, which is a measure of how flexibly, how creatively we think, goes up. We're able to come up with more novel ideas, and we are also less likely to put people into rigid categories. We're less likely to stereotype people when we're in a state of joy. So all of these things help broaden us out and open us up to new things. So it's great that we had a performance, a joyful start to this evening to put us in the right mindset for connection and exploration. And joy strengthens relationships. So this works across the full continuum of a relationship. If you are meeting someone for the first time, a great thing to do is go to a funny movie or go to a comedy club, do something that's gonna make you laugh. Because when you laugh with someone you've just met for the first time, you are more likely to share the kinds of information that will get below the level of small talk so that you can make a real bond. And then deeper into a relationship, when you're in a long-term partnership, research shows that when you experience small moments of joy together, it deepens a sense of trust and intimacy and connection in that relationship. So it protects it over the long haul. And of course, we know that those relationships are one of the most important things in that long-term happiness. So I think in a lot of ways, when we focus on joy, it's as if happiness finds us. Instead of going off in pursuit of it, we're more productive, we're more creative, we're more connected, we're feeling healthier, we are more resilient. And all of these things add up to something that looks a lot like happiness. Now, I want to take a step back because, of course, as you heard from my bio, I didn't set out to study joy. I set out to study design. And it was in my first year as a design student at Pratt Institute that a professor made an offhand comment. It was at my first year-end review. I had all of the things I had created over the year behind me, and a panel of professors in front of me, and he said, "Your work gives me a feeling of joy." And I thought, well, that's weird. I always thought of joy as this ephemeral, fleeting feeling, not something that comes from stuff. I mean, I was a designer, I was really excited to make stuff, but at the same time, what did that have to do with joy? So I asked the professor and the panel in front of me, how do tangible things create intangible joy? How do these things connect? And they couldn't answer the question. And this sent me off on a journey, one that I didn't know at the time would take me more than 10 years to understand the relationship between the mysterious, quixotic emotion that we call joy and the physical world around us. And what I discovered is that not only are these two things linked, but that the physical world can be a powerful, powerful resource to us in cultivating happier and healthier lives. After that review, I started asking everyone I knew, and even lots of people I didn't know, about the things and places that brought them joy. On the subway, on the bus, even got a clipboard and stood out in Times Square. That made me really popular. And asked people about what brought them joy. And right away I noticed that there were certain things that just kept coming up again and again and again. They were things like cherry blossoms, which you guys have going on down here. We do not have them yet up north, but I am eagerly watching for them. Bubbles, swimming pools, and tree houses, hot air balloons, and googly eyes, rainbows, and rainbow sprinkles. There's something about these things that cuts across lines of age and gender and ethnicity. They're not joyful for just a few people, they're joyful for nearly everyone. They're universally joyful. And seeing them all together gave me this indescribably hopeful feeling. The world we live in is so divided that sometimes it feels like our differences are so stark as to be insurmountable. And yet underneath it all, there's a part of each of us that finds joy in the same things. And though these things are often dismissed as just passing pleasures, in fact, they're really important because they remind us of the shared humanity that we find in our common experience of the physical world. But what is it about these things that makes them so joyful? I had pictures of them pinned up on my studio wall, and every day I would come in and look at them and try to make sense of it. And then one day, something just clicked. I saw all these patterns, round shapes, pops of bright color, symmetrical shapes and repeating patterns, a sense of abundance and multiplicity, a feeling of lightness or elevation. When I looked at it this way, I realized that yes, the feeling of joy is mysterious and elusive, but we can access it through tangible physical attributes, or what designers call aesthetics, a word that comes from the same root as the Greek asthenome, which means I feel, I sense, I perceive. What these patterns were telling me is that joy begins with the senses, and so I started calling them aesthetics of joy, the sensations of joy. And I gave them names that related to the kind of joy that they seemed to elicit. And then I noticed more of them, like freedom, the joy we find in wild nature and open space. Magic, the joy of things you can't quite pin down, like light shattered through a prism, or the dancing movements of the northern lights. Surprise, the joy of contrast and the unexpected. Celebration, those moments of intense collective joy where it just feels like it's going to burst out of your body, and you see these dancing movements and bursting shapes, fireworks, the pop of a champagne cork. That's all celebration. And renewal, the aesthetic you find in your garden, the aesthetic of blossoming and growth and potential. Altogether, I identified 10 of these aesthetics of joy, and each one is a connection between the physical world around us, the landscape outside of us, and the emotional landscape within us. Each one is a way of understanding how things in our surroundings can bring out that feeling of joy, whether childlike or uplifting or exuberant, and seeing that for ourselves. And in the wake of this discovery, I noticed something, that as I walked around, I began spotting little moments of joy everywhere I went. It was like I had a pair of rose-colored glasses, and now that I knew what to look for, I was spotting little moments of joy just hidden in plain sight. I started calling this joy spotting, and it became a kind of mindfulness practice, a way of tuning my senses to the joy that already existed around me, and noticing that I could use my surroundings to buoy my spirits just by paying attention. At the same time, I noticed something else, that if these are the things that bring us joy, why are they so missing from so many places in our world? Why do we go to work here? Why do we do it? Why do we send our kids to schools that look like this? Why do our cities look like this? And this is most acute for the places that house the people who are most vulnerable in our society. I'm talking nursing homes, hospitals, homeless shelters, housing projects. How did we end up in a world that looks like this? We all start out joyful. But as we get older, being colorful or exuberant opens us up to judgment. Adults who exhibit their joy are often dismissed as childish or superficial, unserious or self-indulgent. And so it's no wonder that we start to hold ourselves back from joy. And I think it's really important to know that this comes from a deep cultural bias. So this is Goethe writing in 1810. He says, savage nations, uneducated people, and children typically have a predilection for vivid colors, whereas people of refinement avoid them and try to banish them from their presence. So he's setting up an equation here, right? He's saying that if you want to wear color and express your joy in that way, then you are unsophisticated, juvenile, primitive even. And then Adolf Loos, writing at the beginning of the modernist movement, a movement that has probably done more to shape our surroundings, the everyday urban and even non-urban surroundings that we live in, he says, freedom from ornament is a sign of spiritual strength. So he's turning this into a moral equation. And he's saying that to engage in the kind of decoration that is common in so many indigenous and craft traditions is a moral failing. It's a weakness. And so it's no wonder that we push joy to the edges of our world. Joy gets to live in amusement parks and beaches and nature preserves, hotels and resorts, and the rest of the world was left to languish. So if the aesthetics of joy can be used to find more joy in the world around us, couldn't they also be used to create more joy? This was my question, and I went out and scoured the planet looking for people who were doing this. And this led me to a story that took place in the year 2000 in the city of Tirana, Albania. Now, 2000 in Tirana was 10 years since the fall of communism. The city had not fared well in that decade. It was rife with corruption, unemployment was high, pickpockets on the street corners, and the city was so broke that the garbage just piled up uncollected in the streets. And against this backdrop, they elected a new mayor. His name was Edi Rama, and he was an artist by training. And he didn't have much to work with, but with what he did have, he did this. He started painting vibrant designs on all of the downtown buildings. Public buildings, private buildings, didn't matter, which, as you can imagine, was not everyone's favorite thing, especially landlords. Landlords were not always a fan of coming out and finding that the mayor had decided their building was going to be yellow with red stripes. But shortly after this painting project began, strange things started to happen. So first, people stopped littering in the streets. And then shopkeepers started to remove the grates, the metal grates from their shopfront windows. They said that the streets felt safer, even though there were no more police on the streets than before. And then people began to pay their municipal taxes. So something that a decade of enforcement hadn't been able to get people to do, people were suddenly doing voluntarily. With the added tax revenue, Rama was able to plant thousands of trees, clean up the city parks. 5 years after this painting project began, the number of businesses in Tirana had tripled, and the tax revenue had increased by a factor of 6. And 10 years after this project began, Tirana was at the top of the Lonely Planet's most desirable destination. So it had gone from a place that people were fleeing, they were trying to get visas to get out of, to a place that people were trying to get visas to get into, who were trying to come and travel to and experience it. And this seemed to me so wild that this just started with color. But I soon found people doing similar things close to home, like the nonprofit Public Color, which works in New York City in underserved city school districts. They go into schools and they transform them with vibrant paint, working with the students. And what they have found is that attendance improves, graffiti disappears, and kids say they feel safer in these painted buildings. And this aligns with research conducted in 4 different countries as diverse as Saudi Arabia, Sweden, and Argentina, which shows that people working in more colorful work environments are more alert, confident, friendly, and joyful than people working in drab spaces. So though the color seems like it's just on the surface, it has effects that go much deeper, influencing our mindset and even our interactions with others. You can see this actually really clearly in a study that was done in Vancouver. In this study, the researchers placed people either next to a rainbow crosswalk or a plain old regular crosswalk. And they asked them a really simple question. They said, if you dropped your wallet here, how likely do you think it is that it would be returned to you? This is a measure that urbanists use to measure trust in an area, right? To measure how much people trust in a neighborhood, what confidence they have in their neighbors. And people are more likely to believe they'll get their wallet back when they're standing next to a rainbow crosswalk. So the color changes not just how we look at the place, it changes how we see each other. And so when you look at the story of Tirana, which seems so wild, it makes so much more sense when you understand that color changes how we view each other. It gives us a fundamental sense that we're part of something bigger that is alive. Now, why would this be the case? Well, some researchers see a connection to our evolution. Color, in a very primal way, is a sign of energy, a sign of life. So it makes sense that when we see more color, it feels like our surroundings are alive. And the same is true of our love of abundance. We evolved in a world where scarcity was dangerous to us, and abundance meant survival. Which is why one confetto, which is the singular of confetti, is not very joyful. It's something you might pick off your shoe, right? But multiply it and you have a handful of one of the most joyful substances on earth. The architect Emmanuelle Moreau uses this idea in her work a lot. This is a nursing home she designed, and this is the room where residents visit with their families. And I thought it was so interesting when I visited that the administrator who runs this nursing home said that families linger longer. They spend more time visiting their elderly relatives since they redesigned this space. And think of the knock-on effects, the effects on the residents' health, the interconnectedness of those families, all just from making very simple changes to the space. Some of these aesthetics of joy have even been traced to specific parts of our nervous system. So, for example, these round shapes. Neuroscientists have placed people into fMRI machines and shown them pictures of angular objects and round ones. And what they find is that when we look at the angular objects, part of our brain called the amygdala, associated in part with fear and anxiety, lights up. But when we look at the curves, that part of the brain stays silent. They speculate that because sharp angles in nature could be dangerous to us, we evolved an unconscious sense of caution around these shapes, whereas curves set us at ease. You can see this in the newly rebuilt Sandy Hook Elementary School building. This is a topic that, unfortunately, we keep having to talk about. But after the mass shooting there in 2012 that claimed 28 lives, the town decided to tear down the school building and start over. And they knew that it needed to be secure, of course. But they didn't want this place to feel like a fortress. They wanted it to feel safe, and they wanted it to feel joyful. And so they filled the building with curves. There are waves running the length of the building. There are squiggly canopies over the entryway, and the whole building bends toward the entrance in a kind of welcoming gesture. Throughout all of my work and seeing all of the ways these aesthetics are used in the world, there's one thing that I keep coming back to, which is this idea that joy isn't just something we have to find, it's something we can create. I think if you're anything like me, I grew up feeling that joy was a little bit like luck. You find it, if you find it, it's great, but you don't really have any control over it, right? It's just something that comes and goes in your life, and you're sort of at the mercy of it. But joy is something we can create. We can create more moments of joy for ourselves, and we can create more moments of joy for each other, for our communities. To me, this idea is so powerful because it starts with just these tiny, tiny little moments. So what I wanted to do in just the last few minutes is share some thoughts on how we do that and give you some inspiration. So the question that I am always asking as my first step whenever I'm working with clients, I work with clients across a wide range of industries, or whether I'm talking to people about their homes or any part of your life, is how do you want people to feel, or how do you want to feel in a given experience in a given place? And the more specific you can get about that, the better, right? Because I think when we think about joy, it just feels big and vague. And so the reason I think these aesthetics can be helpful is because they can help us pin down what specific kind of joy we want to feel. How do we want to feel joy? And I want to share just a few examples of different ways that these can be used in maybe smaller ways in experiences that you might be creating. So this, of course, part of your joyful festival. This caught my eye last night, and I confess I was a little too shy to yell into those tubes to make these things pop out. I was really curious and also a little shy. But this is a wonderful example of play, this isn't just any kind of joy. This is very specifically designed to draw out the inner child, to get you to play and engage with it. And I think in public space, this is such a wonderful shift because, of course, public art used to be about commemoration and veneration. It was statues, and now public art is this liberation of the inner child. And I love seeing things like this because they bring us into a new engagement with the city and with the place around us. So play. Abundance. Okay, so one thing that you can do if you have an experience is think about what it lacks. So we have friends who have 2 little girls, and they went to London, and they came back, and they saw, of course, they saw lots of wonderful things, and the thing they couldn't stop talking about was the airplane ride. And the reason is because they were on Norwegian Airlines, and Norwegian Airlines does this thing when they dim the lights for, sleeping time, and then when they turn the lights back on, they do a rainbow light show through the cabin. And so this is such a wonderful use of these principles because what do you not have in an airplane? Generally, you have the opposite of abundance. You have monotony. So anytime you have an experience that is unjoyful, you can look at what does it lack, right? It lacks abundance, or it might lack freedom, or it lacks harmony. And so they brought in a sense of abundance. They brought in an abundance of color. And it's only 2 moments. You only see it twice for like a few seconds. And that is the thing that they went home talking about, right? Not Big Ben and not all these other wonderful things that I'm sure that city has to offer, but the airplane. So if you are creating experiences for people, know that you don't have to get the whole experience right. One moment is enough to create a halo over the whole thing that you're creating. But you want to focus on thinking about what does this lack and what is something I can add to create that joy. And so here, abundance is a great example. Or surprise. So this is how they clean the windows at the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. And I love this because it's a wonderful observation. Kids must be fascinated by those window cleaners. I'm fascinated by window cleaners. If people are cleaning windows in a building I'm in, I am looking. It is crazy, right? And they scale the buildings, and it's so cool. And so they decided to take that up a notch by creating this wonderful surprise. So anytime you have an experience that is kind of an afterthought, it's a great moment to say, how could I make this weird, right? Surprise is all about weirdness. It's all about contrast. It's all about strange juxtapositions. So surprise is a great aesthetic to put into a moment that is kind of an overlooked moment, a moment that isn't that important, can be made so joyful by adding a surprise. And then one more I wanted to share, which I think it's important to recognize that you can add joy to moments that are not inherently joyful, that, not just like a plane ride, because a plane ride's a mixed bag. You're going somewhere, you're excited, but also you're stuck in there. It's like sort of a mixed bag. But this is an experience that is truly unjoyful. This was the Javits Center Field Hospital that was created at the beginning of COVID, in that, really awful early period of the pandemic when the New York hospitals were all full and they turned the convention center into a hospital, a field hospital. And what I notice when I look at this image is these little plants. Can you see them? There's like a little plant in each room. And someone had that thought. Someone had that thought to say, I'm going to do some tiny thing to make this more human, feel more alive. And freedom is the aesthetic that we crave when we're stuck, when we're confined, right? Freedom is wild nature, open space, even bringing a tiny, so if you work in a closed space, plants, even if there's not much light, get a fake plant or one of those low light plants, but plants can be something that brings in that sense of openness and expansion. But it doesn't have to be something that makes you want to jump up and dance. That's not always what joy looks like. Sometimes it's this tiny little offset that shows you that there's life in a place that feels hopeless. So, I want to share just one more story. It's a story of a custom that is practiced by the Dene people, also known as the Navajo people. They celebrate something special. They celebrate a baby's first laugh. This is, I know, it's so good. But for me, so basically, baby's first laugh is usually around 3 months. And the person who makes the baby laugh for the first time gets the honor of co-hosting the party with the baby. They have a big party, and they hand out gifts, and it's a huge festive celebration. But the thing that really always stays with me is why they celebrate this. And the reason the Dene people celebrate this is because this is the moment that they believe that the baby's spirit has decided to stick around, has decided to become fully human, to commit to this journey with all its ups and downs, right? It's the moment of first joy. That is the moment that the spirit commits. And so for me, so often we see joy as this nice to have, but it is not a nice to have. When we push it off to the edges of life, when we say it's a reward, we'll get to it later, when it lives on the weekends, when it lives in amusement parks and beaches, and it doesn't live in the heart of our lives every day, we are denying an essential part of our humanity. So, I just want you to remember that within you, within all of us, we have this impulse to seek out joy in our surroundings. It's natural, and we have it for a reason. Because on the most basic, fundamental level, the drive toward joy is the drive toward life. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to hear your questions.